This is a do or die week for Trump. Last week was not good for him. He gave a widely panned press conference where he veered off message and compared his crowd sizes to MLK and said a whole bunch of other things that were totally off message for his campaign. Meanwhile, Harris and Walz continued to raise a ton of money and were barnstorming the country with these humongous rallies that really seem to have gotten in Trump's head. Trump took to Truth Social to complain about the crowd sizes. He said, quote, "She's a cheater. She had nobody waiting and the crowd looked like 10,000 people." And he wrote, the same thing is happening with her fake crowds at her speeches. This is the way Democrats win elections, by cheating. They're even worse at the ballot box. This is not a great look for Trump. It shows that he's kind of thinking about the wrong things, that he's not using the limited time and attention that he has with voters to drive a consistent message that's going to win them over. And he seems to be just obsessed with this crowd issue. And needless to say, there has been no evidence that the Harris campaign has been manipulating the images of their crowds using artificial intelligence, and there seems to be genuine enthusiasm for her campaign. And I think Trump and people within his circles were taking to social to try to dispute those crowd sizes. What they really need to be doing is driving a message. The week was bad for Trump for a number of other reasons. There was one particularly threatening moment when Joe Rogan sort of endorsed RFK Jr. He said RFK is the only one not gaslighting or manipulating. Rogan called out both parties, and he says that RFK Jr. is the only one who makes sense to him. He said he's a fan. A lot of people took that as an endorsement, for good reason. It sounds like an endorsement. But then Trump attacked Rogan, saying that he'd be booed at the next UFC event. And then it seems like Rogan caved. He said, for the record, this isn't an endorsement. This is me saying that I like RFK Jr. as a person, and I really appreciate the way he discusses things with civility and intelligence. And then he went on to say some nice things about Trump, and that Trump raising his fist, saying he'd fight, was the most American thing he'd ever seen. Most people took what Rogan originally said as an endorsement, including RFK Jr., who tweeted it out the way you would tweet out an endorsement. But an inconvenient episode for Trump, and one that I think could, even with Rogan pulling back, is going to cause some problems, because Rogan has the biggest podcast in the world, and that is particularly popular with a segment of the population that Trump really, really needs to win by a pretty significant margin, and that would be independent and right-leaning men, which is the majority of Rogan's audience. But more than anything else, the reason why the week was really bad is because the week continued on a trend of very positive polls and trends for Harris and Walz. New York Times, Siena, which is one of the highest rated pollsters, came out with a poll over the weekend of battleground states that showed Harris up 4 in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. So up 4 in each of those 3 states. This is a big deal. This is a poll that was not looking good for Biden previously. And the Trump campaign released a memo saying that the polls were actually showed Trump in the lead, which is odd because they clearly didn't. Dan Pfeiffer, the Democratic strategist, tweeted out saying that, one truism in politics is that the side trying to unskew the polls is losing. And I tend to agree. Like, look, one could quibble with one poll or the other, but one poll after another has shown Harris in the lead. Almost every average, including, sort of more right-leaning websites like Real Clear Politics, show that the average of polls is in Harris's favor. It's still close. It's anybody's race to win, but Harris is clearly in a much better position than Biden was before he dropped out, and probably slightly ahead of Trump. The Polymarket odds, like sort of betting odds market, now has Harris ahead of Trump, 52-46. And most worrisome for Trump, the Financial Times reported that now, for the first time ever, voters are saying or at least in one critical poll, voters are saying that they trust Harris more than Trump on the economy. Trump had previously been dominating that metric against Biden and against Harris in the early polls. Put simply, Trump cannot win the election if he is not winning on that metric. He needs to be more trusted on the economy because he's been pounding inflation and economic indicators since the beginning of this race. That is a very bad sign for Trump and something he's going to have to reverse. A lot of people, including right-wing pollsters like Frank Luntz, have been kind of jumping on this. Karl Rove, Frank Luntz are saying things like, if the election were held today, Harris would win. And that seems to be my assessment as well. Harris is also dominating on social media. So I previously talked on the Last Debate show, my podcast, about how previously Biden, the Biden-Trump TikTok split was very much in Trump's favor. Most of the stuff on TikTok was positive about Trump. Most of the stuff on TikTok about Biden was negative. That is not true of Harris. So 17% of the top performing TikTok posts last week mentioning Harris were negative. 82% were positive. And it's the flip for Trump now. So 89% of top performing TikTok posts last week mentioning Trump were negative and 8% were positive. So all in all, whether it's social engagement, whether it's the polls, whether it's the views of the economy, whether it's the ability to drive a message, the words coming out of the candidate's mouth, the amount of events they're holding, it was a bad week for Trump. And so that's why I say this is a particularly high stakes week for Trump. Not all the news was bad last week for Trump. There's one particular piece of underreported news that certainly caught my attention. Michael Prusser released voter registration data from the states that have the information publicly available that showed that the GOP is trouncing the Democrats in July voter registration. So in the month of July, the GOP registered over 250,000 net voters. So an increase to the voting rolls of 250,000. Dems registered a negative 19,000. So have lost more voters in the rolls, either because they changed their registrations or they're no longer eligible. They lost more voters than they gained. That is huge. And within that data, were particularly troubling numbers in Pennsylvania, which showed a very similar trend where Republicans are registering a lot more voters in Pennsylvania. Now, it's just 1 month, and one would want to see this month with the sort of Harris enthusiasm. But if I were Democrats, I'd be very concerned about that. If I were Republicans, I would sense that as an opportunity. The numbers in Pennsylvania, for instance, are over 21,000 net for the GOP in Pennsylvania and only 5,700 about net for Democrats. So basically a 4x amount of voter registration for Republicans and Democrats. The pro-Trump super PAC this PAC is planning to spend $100 million on TV for an ad blitz in the lead up to Labor Day. So it's another piece of positive news for Trump. And you'd imagine that the PAC is probably going to have more message discipline than Trump. This tends to be true. The ads tend to drive a consistent message: immigration, inflation, crime, right? These are the messages that Republicans have long been running, and this is what you can expect from the PACs. And this is the MAGA Incorporated Trump-aligned PAC, and they're going to run those ads in the Rust Belt and Sunbelt states. Trump is also, like, in a way, I talked about this on the Lost Debate podcast last week, but they're tucked within the sort of chaos over there are some workable positions in terms of politics. One of them was, Trump had been driving the debate in Nevada, for instance, over his proposal to not tax tips. Harris has now matched that call for a ban, so she's trying to steal a little bit of the momentum that Trump has for what is a popular proposal for the service workers in Nevada. Now, we could have a whole separate conversation about how workable that is from a policy perspective and fiscal perspective, but Trump at least had set the terms of that debate. Now, given that Harris is basically agreeing with him, is he going to get much political benefit from only time will tell. Trump is also back on X and Twitter. He released a video today saying on November 2024, justice will be done, and it's kind of a roll-up, kind of a rah-rah video, probably meant more for his supporters than anybody else. But, all in all, the Harris team seems very confident. Harris's chief strategist, David Plouffe, tweeted a couple of days ago. He said less than 90 days until the election, the Republican nominee for president was in Montana, not a battleground state, not driving a coherent message, seeming incoherent himself at times, and being most obsessed with damage control about a story where he confused two black men. He's referring to the Willie Brown incident, the helicopter. We won't go into that. But it did seem like a bad week for Trump. He needs to turn things around. I would expect something big this week from Trump in order to try to steal attention ahead of the Democratic convention. Big questions I have heading into this week are, will Harris do a press conference? Will the Wall's military hits wane? Will Harris continue her strong run of polls? Will Walz and Harris continue their run of massive rallies? And will Trump continue to obsess over that at the expense of his ability to drive messages? And again, will Trump have some kind of major shakeup or major announcement this week to try to steal attention? Because he is in an unfamiliar place right now. He is struggling to get the attention of the media and the electorate, which is extremely rare for that man. Stay tuned for more.